The killer for me was the cost of ownership of that car. The servicing costs,
average
cost
oil
of tires. I feel, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think the project cost for the Veyron ended up costing the company something like 5 million euros each to produce the car. And I think the sale price at the time was, like €1 million when they were new. So they lost so much money on that project.
Yeah, it was ambitious.
And I just don't understand how, on an annual basis, you have to pay so much money to keep the car on the road. What I really wanted to do was to buy a Supermarine Spitfire, the airplane, World War II British fighter plane. And a friend of mine, who's now my kind of workshop manager, a guy called Glenn, he had a passion for Spitfires as well. So I was like, okay, well, let's find one. Let's find a Spitfire to restore, and we'll just figure it out, and we'll start doing flying lessons, and we'll fly this thing. Turned out that was a bit too ambitious, because you don't just find unrestored Spitfires sitting in barns. It's got a very nice body shape, the Triumph TR3A, and it always really bugged me that throughout my childhood it just sat there, and he never got around to fixing it up. So actually, by the time I'd made a few albums and done a few tours and earned some money, I said to him, Dad, look, let's find the best Triumph restorer that we can find, and I'm going to pay for it. I just want this car restored. Because he always made a point of telling me when I was growing up that when he goes, I'm getting that car. I'm Guy Berryman, and this is Cars and Culture with Jason Stein.
What an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. Guy, welcome into Cars and Culture.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, it is absolutely wonderful to have you. And I want to start, I guess, probably with the obvious, in that we haven't really seen you and your bandmates for a couple of years outside of some very unique video products that you've put out, and obviously the release of albums and videos that have been released just even in the last month or so. It must feel good to have a tour that is up and coming, that's in front of you.
Yes, it really does. Our last tour ended in 2017, so it feels like a lifetime ago since we were playing in these kind of stadiums, and with all these people in front of us, and playing live is really kind of it's such an important part of being in a band, because we kind of hide away in studios and make these albums, and then they go onto the streaming platforms and people are in their houses listening to it. But really, when you're playing live, that's when you have a chance to kind of be in the same space as the people that like your music. So we need that reminder, to know that there's people out there enjoying, the creativity that we're focusing on and the music we're making in the studio.
It's an awesome undertaking to do what all of you do, and in fact, the stage setups are oftentimes elaborate. You've been filling stadiums around the world. How much rehearsal time is there to get ready for a tour like this, of this undertaking?
Well, the rehearsal time is relatively short. I think the preparation for the tour, the planning, organizing some of the more complex technical aspects of the tour, it's something which happens several years before the tour starts. And I'm actually in London at the moment, rehearsing with the guys, and just from a musical point of view, figuring out how to play the new songs and remembering how to play the old songs, and that's coming together quite well. But the tricky thing about starting a tour like this with the ambition that we have for the show is, with the best will in the world, you can plan in your mind how the show is going to be, but until you've actually done the first show, you don't really fully understand how it's going to sit with you. And I think we always find that, we need to get the first, 5 or 10 shows underway for us to kind of really start digging in and modifying the set list and changing little bits of production to just refine it into the place where it usually settles, and then we carry on going, and we always get the show to a point where we feel very happy with it, and then that just kind of runs for the rest of the tour. So the first few weeks are always about testing things and seeing how the set list flows from one song into another, and it's not until you've actually got a live audience in front of you that you can sometimes make these judgments.
You spent 4 years on the sidelines, and 2 that were not planned, obviously, given the situation around COVID. How tough was that? I mean, you were so used to having a schedule and an exhaustive tour schedule. I know you got into all kinds of other things, which we're going to talk about here today. But how difficult was it to not be a part of that? Some may have said hamster wheel of the past, and maybe do you look back on it as it not being as much of a grind as it was when you were living it?
I mean, honestly, I don't think we would have been touring any earlier than we are now. So I don't feel we've lost any time, and with respect to when this tour is starting. Of course, COVID has been an unbelievable, tragedy across the world in many ways. And the first lockdown it took some getting used to. It was unlike anything any of us had ever experienced before. And I think for somebody in my position who's traveling constantly with the band, and I travel constantly for other projects that I'm involved in, to have this kind of enforced situation where you're just in your home for such a long period of time without thinking about packing a suitcase or jumping on a flight to, X, Y, Z destination. It took a little bit of getting used to. But quite honestly, once I settled into the rhythm of that, it felt like quite an interesting place to be. And of course, you just modify. We all had to kind of adjust the way that we communicate with people, the way that we work. I think creatively, it was very interesting for me to just have ideas and to develop ideas in the space of my own, home and studio that I have at home. So I really settled into it and just tried to turn it into a positive thing, as much as one could in such a negative scenario. So it was a pretty, I kind of enjoyed it in the end. I really got into the rhythm of it. And of course, as a band, we found ways of communicating with each other. We were still able to work on our album by sending files over to each other. And of course, you can make hit records on a laptop now.
Exactly.
You don't need big fancy studios. And so we just figured out a way of working and to kind of keep things moving forwards creatively as a band. And I have a fashion label as well, and we launched the label actually in the midst of the pandemic, which was interesting because it's a relatively expensive brand, and of course everybody was really concerned about their livelihoods and their incomes, and so it was a strange time to attempt to launch a kind of a fairly luxury line. But we did it. And of course, the ongoing development processes that we had for creating new garments, we had to figure out how to. My design studio for the label's based in Amsterdam, so we had to figure out a way of designing garments over Zoom, essentially. I mean, we were sending prototypes backwards and forwards to each other, but like everyone, I think we all adjusted pretty well and pretty quickly to just keep the wheels moving.
Swapping of audio files, swapping of drawings. You just reinvented how creativity could be shared among people, didn't you? But you just didn't
Well,
have to be in the same place.
absolutely. And I think we all realized that a lot of the traveling that we were doing prior to the pandemic was probably unnecessary. And I think that's one good thing that's come out of it is the culture of communication and Zoom. And I just think all of those behaviors that we adopted during COVID and in order to move forwards, we're kind of maintaining those habits going forward as we kind of come out of the situation.
And in fact, you were already working with sustainability consultants to prepare to go on the road in a more eco-friendly method and process, and things like electric vehicles from a sustainability point of view, aviation fuel, battery technology. If anything, this could have just jump-started many of those efforts, I'm guessing.
It did. We had a lot of interest from companies who were willing to offer their services and their products and their technologies to help us with our tour. And we are, we've built in a lot of those ideas into the tour, which starts in a few weeks' time in Costa Rica.
Yeah, it'll be amazing to see how all of that comes together. I want to talk about something that some people might not know. There's a real good chance that if a decision or two had gone one way or the other, that you would be a mechanical engineer. That and your father worked on the tunnel.
The channel, yes, the Channel Tunnel,
yes,
which there's the big tunnel which joins England to France.
But you were an engineer at heart, and as was your father.
Yes, I think that's certainly the way my brain is wired is very much as an engineer. I think as a small child, I was always quite advanced with. I always get told the story when I was about 2 years old. I discovered how to use a screwdriver, and I used to go around the house with my screwdriver, taking off all the electrical sockets from the wall, which sounds pretty terrifying. But
it does sound terrifying, actually.
I've always had a very analytical brain, a very kind of creative side to me, and I was studying engineering at college when we formed the band. Architecture also is a great passion of mine.
So what do you think you would have ended up doing had you not met the three other guys?
I think it would have been definitely some kind of product design, whether it would have been in automotive or architecture or industrial design. I think that's the path I was clearly going down. But I always had a huge passion for music since I was a teenager, 12 or 13 years old, when I decided I wanted to become a bass player. And of course, you go to an opportunity. We formed the band, and we had the opportunity to turn it into a career with a record deal from EMI. And when you're 19 years old, you don't say no. You don't say no to that kind of opportunity.
You spent a lot of time interested in your father's Triumph.
Yes, that was my passion. That's where my passion for cars came from. When I was living in Scotland, when my father was in the Navy as a younger man, I think he was in his mid-20s, he bought a Triumph TR3A. And I've seen pictures of him standing next to it, when he bought it, which are brilliant. But by the time I was born, the car was mothballed, and it was up on bricks in the garage. Boxes had been piled on top of it, and it was just covered in junk, and it had come off the road many years before I was born. And he always planned to restore it, but never got around to doing it. And I used to always go into the garage and just kind of lift up one corner of the cover that was over the car, and just see this kind of incredible curvaceous fender, and it was just the most exotic car thing I'd ever seen. It's got a very nice body shape, the Triumph TR3A, and it always really bugged me that throughout my childhood it just sat there, and he never got around to fixing it up. So actually, by the time I'd made a few albums and done a few tours and earned some money, I said to him, Dad, look, let's find the best Triumph restorer that we can find, and I'm going to pay for it. I just want this car restored. Because he always made a point of telling me when I was growing up that when he goes, I'm getting that car. So I kind of wanted to see it finished, and I also wanted to see him use it. So we had that car restored by a guy in England, and I mean, I'm pretty sure this is the most expensive Triumph TR3A in the world. It's they're not wildly valuable cars, but of course restoration costs are what they are. Whether you're restoring a Ferrari or a Triumph, you still pay a lot of money. So yeah, that was where the birth of my passion for cars came from. My father and his Triumph.
And you've always had that. And when you got to a point, as you say, when a few albums were complete, you had the opportunity to then start a collection and start adding things into the collection beyond the Triumph. Yeah,
I did. I mean, prior to that, when I was still at school as a teenager, I was helping. My dad had MGs as well. He had an MG BGT and an MG Midget. And
loyal to the British brands.
Yeah, well, he's very, he was a Royal Navy guy, and it was all British sports cars, and that was this Italian Exotica was not on their radar. But I used to at weekends, pull those cars apart, and so I kind of really cut my teeth on how cars go together when I was a teenager, and then of course. Yeah, I started collecting cars when I was probably in my mid to late 20s. That's when my collection started.
What was the first one that you added to the collection beyond the Triumph?
It was an E-Type.
Okay.
And the story was I wanted to do something in engineering and something in restoration. So I ended up buying an E-Type to restore, but there was quite a long journey to get to the E-Type, because what I actually attempted to do was to buy, what I really wanted to do was to buy a Supermarine Spitfire, the airplane, World War II British fighter plane. And a friend of mine, who's now my kind of workshop manager, a guy called Glenn, he had a passion for Spitfires as well. So I was like, okay, well, let's find one. Let's find a Spitfire to restore, and we'll just figure it out, and we'll start doing flying lessons, and we'll fly this thing. Turned out that was a bit too ambitious, because you don't just find unrestored Spitfires sitting in barns, and and even if you did, you have to have extremely specialized knowledge and engineering skills and certifications to be able to get one of these things airworthy at a huge expense. And then if you want to fly them,
find an E-Type.
Well, exactly. If you want to fly one of these planes, which are extraordinarily dangerous airplanes to fly, especially if you've just passed your flying test. So anyway, the whole thing didn't stack up, and I thought, okay, well, let's just kind of lower our ideas a little bit, and I ended up purchasing a Jaguar E-Type in need of restoration, and we were off with the whole journey.
Never thought of the Spitfire again, or are you still thinking?
Well, actually, I mean, if I really want to bore you with the story, before we got to the E-Type, I actually did buy a Tiger Moth. And tried to restore that, but again realized I didn't have the certain qualifications required to get an old airplane airworthy. So I actually did send that plane to someone else to restore, and they restored it, and it's flying, and I sold it, and it's flying, and it does kind of, you can go and take a ride in a Tiger Moth, in my Tiger Moth, which I had restored.
Amazing. Your interest in cars really fundamentally lies in the engineering, back to that again, and the concepts behind them. And all you have said that all of the cars that are in your collection have something significant beneath the surface. You love form following function. We're going to talk about Porsches in a minute, but form following function, and how that industrial design, and by the way, whether it's clothing or cars, is a mantra that you really follow at all times. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. What's special about cars? I think why I'm particularly drawn to cars, and particularly classic cars, is they encapsulate so many disciplines that I'm interested in. So I love engineering. So I'm interested in I love engines and gearboxes. And I love the story and the development of engines and just the whole powertrain of a car. I also feel, especially with the cars that I like, which are predominantly European sports cars from the 1960s, I think broadly that describes what I like. They're like sculptures, so I can appreciate the form of the cars, on a sculptural level. But then, really when you're looking at those era of cars, the interiors, the leatherwork, the stitching, I mean, there's all these disciplines rolled into one object. And I'm fascinated by all of those different disciplines that have been put into this kind of singular, beautiful object.
And what is it about that era that draws you in?
I think I really believe cars back then have a certain shape, a certain fluidity, which can only come when you're drawing by hand. So modern day automotive design leaves me a little bit cold, and I fundamentally feel that it's due to the tools which designers use to create shapes and to create form. I think automotive, if you think about those CAD programs, you can make very complex things very quickly when you're running a CAD program, which you can't do when you're drawing something by hand. A Ferrari 275 GTB could only have ever been drawn by a hand and a pencil. And so I think it was the limitations that designers had in the 50s and 60s, combined with the huge cultural freedom and just sense of hope that swept across the world, post World War II, which allowed people to explore all of these wild ideas. So for me, there was just a kind of it was lots of things coming together in that era at the same time, which created something greater than the sum of its parts. I mean, I find mid-century design, whether it be cars or architecture or furniture, is just something that I don't have to think about. I just see it and I like it.
Yeah. Cars, by their very nature, and the design of cars are emblematic of the generation at that time, aren't they? And maybe it says something about where we are currently in the design of what we're seeing on the roads today. It's a spirit that you just described. There was a spirit of the 60s. There was a spirit of the products developed in the 60s. And now you see a return to that minimalist in form and function now, right?
I think so. I think we're seeing, I think we've got to a point where these, if we're talking about sports cars and these supercars and hypercars, they became something where so many fins and wings and bits of carbon fiber were added just for the sake of stylization. They don't necessarily have a function, but it's just to do something which looks good on a website or looks good on Instagram. And I think it's particularly interesting. We've got to a point now where I think people are starting to see through that. And I had an interesting conversation with Gordon Murray, who's
Mm-hmm.
creating some very interesting cars at the moment. And his whole mantra is about a return to beauty, to simplicity, and to a fluidity and a simplicity of shape that's going into the cars, and just removing anything which is just not needed. And that's something which I'd like to see happen more and more in automotive design.
You have such an interesting collection. I want to focus on just a few of them. Your Bugatti Veyron. It's certainly not a 1960s model, and it has one mode, which is fast. But you love the spirit of it, the design of it. Again, right? Is that what draws you?
That's an interesting one.
It's certainly rare.
What do I want to say about the Veyron? I think it's quite a pretty car. I think there is a simplicity to that car. And what I was really drawn to was just the scale of the brief that was given to that car by Ferdinand Piëch, and the fact that they delivered on it. I thought was a milestone in engineering. Honestly, I've sold the car because I didn't like driving it that much, actually. And
what was it you didn't like about it?
It was wildly powerful. The road noise was quite immense in the cabin because the tires were so wide. It was very difficult to maneuver. I live in the countryside, and the lanes are quite narrow, and it's really it's a very big, wide car. But beyond the kind of engineering prowess which went into that car, and the engine's phenomenal, and the brief was phenomenal, and they delivered upon it, and it was a real game changer in terms of what people were doing with sports cars. I felt I was quite uncomfortable. I was always quite uncomfortable about how heavy the car was. I do believe that cars are still too heavy. Sports cars are still too heavy. But honestly, the killer for me was the cost of ownership of that car. The servicing costs, the
average
cost of
oil
the tires. I feel, I don't know the exact numbers, but I think the project cost for the Veyron ended up costing the company something like 5 million euros each to produce the car. And I think the sale price at the time was like €1 million when they were new. So they lost so much money on that project.
Yeah, it was ambitious.
And I just don't understand how, on an annual basis, you have to pay so much money to keep the car on the road. And I have a sneaking suspicion it's some kind of scheme for them to try and get back some of the money they lost on the on the project. And honestly, I just feel like I don't want to. I didn't drive the car that much. It doesn't have a great use case, certainly for me. And I didn't enjoy how much money I was burning through just owning the car.
We interviewed Rob Dickinson on this show. I know you probably know him from Catherine Wheel. He is
I know him from Singer more than
exactly from Singer Vehicle Design. Yeah. Right. We interviewed him, and I asked him, of course, what Singer does with Porsches. And he said Porsche is the perfect vehicle to own from his perspective, because you can absolutely beat the hell out of it on the track and it'll come back for more, or you can take it touring through the English countryside and it's a great daily driver. You have 5 classic Porsches, I think, if not more. And your view on that brand?
I tend to agree. If you were to have one classic car, it would be a sensible choice, because for all those reasons, you can put it on a racetrack, you can drive it down a gravel rally track, They're pretty comfortable. You can get 4 people in them. They've got pretty good luggage space. They're quite reliable if you set them up properly. They look good. We're talking about the 911 here, I guess.
Yeah, the 911. Yes, yeah. Of course. Yep.
And yeah, I would say if you had to have one car, and if you were saying, okay, I'm interested in buying a classic car, but I only ever want to have one, and I want to keep it forever, and I want to do this, and this, then you would have to steer somebody to the 911. It would be a hard car to beat. I'd say it would be closely followed for me by the E-Type. Which is also a very usable classic car. And this is my whole thing. My collection at some point was, I think, over 30 cars, and now it's down to probably half of that. And it might even get smaller, because I've got to the point where I don't just want to have these cars sitting in my garage, taking up space and not being used. So if there's anything in there now which isn't really getting used because I don't enjoy driving it, or it doesn't have a use case, then I'm probably thinking about moving it on, because I really do believe that we have to use these cars.
Yeah, you've said, I don't think people drive their cars enough in the classic space, which is a shame from a personal standpoint and a cultural point of view. I mean, these are vehicles that need to be used for their intended purpose. It's not just show cars. I know is your belief.
Absolutely, it's true, and it's good for them to be used. It keeps them working well. A car that's been sitting around not being used for a year or so, and you try and take it out for a drive, you're not going to get far. I think the trouble is now, in this day and age, modern cars have become so good, so comfortable. They're like mobile offices. They're quiet. The air conditioning is great.
Flushy.
They don't break down. They're comfortable. And the better modern cars get, the harder it becomes to jump in a classic car, because it's like they smack you in the face with how unrefined they are, how noisy they are. You can't make a phone call in a classic car because the engine noise is too much. You get your destination and you step out the car and you smell your clothes and you can smell the fuel. If you've ever done a long European road trip and you've got your soft bag in the trunk, and you go into your hotel and you unpack your clothes, all your clothes smell like fumes. So it becomes more and more of a challenge to enjoy driving the old cars, I feel. And also you have to also remember that if you're trying to get someplace in an old car, you might not actually get there.
It's true enough. Wait, and in fact, you've been in the Mille Miglia, the famous race.
I've done the Mille Miglia. Yeah, I've done many European. I've taken part in the Modena 100 Ore, which is a great rally. The Coupe des Alpes, the Mille Miglia. I've done the Tour Auto several times, which is a very challenging rally. And I love to drive up in Scotland. The north of Scotland's fantastic for driving old cars in. And that's something that I've really missed over the last couple of years, is actually feeling that freedom of movement in an old car, stopping off at a restaurant, meeting friends in Europe, and just being part of the wider culture which surrounds classic car ownership.
You've been to Grand Prix races. Is there an automotive event that you cannot stay away from? Is there a must-attend event for you?
Let me think about that. I think one that I always gravitate to is the Le Mans Classic, which happens once every 2 years. That's an exceptional event. If for nothing else, just to hear the GT40s roar out of the pit lane. Goodwood Goodwood hosts a lot of fantastic events as well. And there's some of the concours events I really enjoy.
Beach.
Villa d'Este, and there's a fantastic one at Chantilly. which is part of the Peter Auto Group as well as Le Mans Classic. And I've judged at many of these events and enjoy judging because it's such a sociable. It's kind of a small, tight knit community, and you end up going in and taking part in these juries, and everybody knows everyone else. So it's always nice to turn up there and just catch up with old friends.
We saw that Michael Schumacher would, in the off season, come to the United States and ride motorcycles because he could go around the U.S. unnoticed. The same is true for Lewis Hamilton in some circles. Is that something that you covet?
I don't ever really get noticed, and that's kind of the. I'm in a famous band, but I'm not. I'm not a famous or particularly recognizable person, and that suits me fine because I'm quite private by nature. Chris is very recognizable, of course, and he has a very different situation when he goes out and about. But for me, it's never an issue.
You are an enormous fan of collecting film while in the United States, right? Your
film.
Photos that are
photos. Oh, well, look, I'm a collector. I mean, I've got the disease very, very badly, and I collect all manner of things that people would find very uninteresting. I do collect old photographs.
Color film slides is, I guess, what I was intending.
I collect old film slides. I collect
primarily of cars too, right?
Well, I do. Well, yeah. I think it's interesting because I have a very large archive of period magazines from the 1940s through to the 1970s for American titles, British titles, European titles, which is something. Again, I just became obsessed with. I have every single issue of Hot Rod magazine from when it started to I think 1979, and they're all meticulously filed in order.
Wow.
I have all of Road and Track, and I have German titles, so it's a huge library. I mean, I really when I bite down on something, I don't really kind of let go until I'm a completist when it comes to collecting, and the archive has actually proven to be over the years very very helpful in restoration of some of the cars that I've found as projects and projects that I've been managing, some rare cars and some racing cars. And a lot of my archive has actually thrown out a lot of the history of cars that I bought, knowing that there was something special about them, but didn't have the complete picture. So yeah, cars, vinyls, cameras, watches, lamps. I'm just kind of travel the world and go to junk shops and buy it all up.
Well, and you can add to your own magazine archive now with your role at the Road Rat. Your friendship with Mikey Harvey, former editor of Car Magazine, brought you to the genesis of the Road Rat. Can you explain how that came to be?
Well, Mikey and I became friends through the other Road Rat founder, a guy called John Claydon. And we would hang out and we would go driving cars. And one of the things that really struck us was I consume quite a lot of magazines, these kind of coffee table, independently published, beautiful magazines on specialist subjects. So if you're into design, you can buy, there's amazing titles in design, or if you're into wine, there's incredible wine publications, which are beautiful, independently published magazines. And I think for us, it was strange. We were buying all these car magazines from newsstand. And it suddenly struck us, why is there no kind of beautifully produced kind of coffee table magazine for cars? And we kind of said, well, surely there must be. We just haven't found it. Let's look around. And we were looking around and we couldn't really find anything that was kind of done to a certain production level. And we thought, well, this is surely an open goal. We've got to make this. And with my archive and my passion for cars, and John Clayton, he was a car collector as well, and Mikey's experience in editing Top Gear magazine, as well as many other automotive titles, we pulled together a very small skeleton team. And several years ago, we launched the first edition of the Road Rat. And we're now currently on issue 10. It's a quarterly magazine. It's a big magazine.
Yes, thick and glossy, and it's all those things you described. It's a coffee table magazine.
It's a coffee table magazine. I think that's the best way of describing it. It's a difficult thing to describe because it isn't like any other magazine I believe out there. And what was important to us to do was to create something where we weren't following the automotive calendar. So the stories which appear in the Road Rat don't become old after a couple of months. We tried to tell stories about cars, the origin of cars, the human story behind the cars, the designers of these cars or the racers of these cars. And we do cover new cars as well, but we try to do it in a slightly different way from everyone else. So if, for instance, if you're new to discovering the Road Rat and you're jumping in when we're on issue 10, you could still go back to issue 1 and read it in the same way as everyone else read it when it first came out, because it's kind of timeless stories.
So many people over the last number of years have pronounced the death of the print product, but I think I'm with you. If you have a specialty niche that is evergreen, as they say, stories that are timeless in a well-documented format, doesn't that print product provide the antithesis or even the remedy to the day after day, email after email, app after app slog that we all go through? Isn't it a relief?
Yes, I think we sort of see the Road Rat as a quiet place where you would sit down. You would make a cup of coffee. You would find a quiet place in your house, and you would sit down for a couple of hours at a time, and just kind of sink into it. It's not kind of scrolling through things on Instagram or social media or digital. I would say that one of the biggest challenges facing print media is the newsstand model, which we're not a part of. You can only buy our magazine through our website, and I think the issue is when you're playing into a newsstand model. Of course, the newsstand take a large percentage of your cover price, and so it's just a race to bring costs down as much as you can in terms of the production of the magazine. And I don't know if you've noticed, but magazines have gotten thinner and thinner and thinner over the last few years, and they've got more and more ads and less content, simply because they're hamstrung by the newsstand model. So from the outset, we decided, okay, well, we can't play into that game. We have to build slowly. We have to sell direct to consumer. And thankfully it's paying off. We have a big subscriber base now. That's not to say that I do feel that there's a lot of people who are into cars across Europe, across America, across Japan are still yet to discover the Road Rat. But it's growing all the time, and I'm just so happy with the fact when people discover it, they tend to send us extremely positive remarks about how happy they are to have become a subscriber, and how happy they are with the quality of the magazine.
The Road Rat website, again, is the place where you'll find the opportunity to purchase the quarterly issue. So a little plug for you there.